48 hours before we were supposed to lock the florist, my fiancé looked me in the eye and said, "Can we open things temporarily?" I said no. No trial run, no passes. We're either in or we're done. 2 weeks later, while she was on a night shift, an email pinged on her iPad. Marriott downtown, reservation 7:30 p.m. That hotel sits a block from my office in Houston. I'm not a jealous guy, but tell me, what would you think? Here's what makes this worse. Her pitch came with rules. Strangers only. Never twice. No feelings. "It'll make me less insecure," she said. That sentence has been living in my skull ever since. If you've ever stared at evidence you don't want to believe, you know the feeling. The room gets cold, your heart starts counting down, and you need the truth more than you need sleep. So I did the one thing that changed everything. I called the room. Jennifer and I grew up on the same sleepy street outside Houston, where summer smelled like cut grass and gasoline. Our moms swapped recipes, our dads swapped tools, and every 4th of July, both families sat on the same scratchy blankets under the same burst of fireworks. She could outthrow half the boys at kickball. I could make her laugh until she hiccuped. We traded library books, saved seats at church, and shared a pack of grape gum like it was a treaty. If you were raised in a small Texas town, you know how that goes. The neighborhood raises you, and everybody notices when two kids walk home together after school. Back then, Jennifer was the friend I trusted with my baseball cards and my worst secrets. Somewhere between catching lightning bugs and learning to drive, friendship started turning into something heavier. I didn't say it out loud, but my hands knew first when they stopped letting go finally. By middle school, our families operated like a single unit. If my dad's truck broke down, her dad showed up with a socket set before the hood cooled. When her mom worked doubles at the hospital, my mom packed an extra casserole without being asked. Holidays blurred, Thanksgiving at their place, Christmas at ours, birthdays in the church hall with sheet cake and soda. The adults joked about someday, the way Texans joke about rain, half hope, half superstition. I pretended not to hear, but their winks landed like assignments. It wasn't toxic, steady, like a creek wearing down rock. That kind of closeness gives you a story before you've earned it. We shared chores, shared rides, shared a beat-up paperback of The Outsiders that still smelled like cafeteria pizza. When Jennifer sprained her ankle in gym, I learned how to wrap an ace bandage and did it on the tailgate after practice. She called me steady. I wore it like armor. High school turned the volume up on everything. Football Fridays, cologne, late-night drives down FM roads with windows down. Jennifer joined the training staff for the team and carried a kit that looked like a toolbox. I played well enough to keep a jersey. We were orbiting each other all the time. Homeroom jokes, lab partners, the slow shuffle at homecoming when the DJ finally played a country ballad. People started saying our names as one word, the way small towns do. It felt really sweet until it didn't. Expectations have a weight. They settle on your shoulders without asking permission. One night after a game, we sat on the hood of my car eating Whataburger fries, and I reached for her hand like it was the most normal thing in the world. She didn't pull away. I kissed her in light of the parking lot. For the first time, someday felt like a promise, not a prediction. We exhaled. Finally. Once folks decided we were inevitable, the commentary never stopped. At church, Mrs. Ramirez would squeeze my arm and say, "Treat her right, Michael." At the grocery store, the checker asked if we wanted paper or plastic and then added, "For the baby shower someday." It was mostly kind, but it folded us into a future we hadn't actually chosen. Jennifer handled it with a smile. I nodded like a bobblehead. We went to prom in borrowed elegance, her in a dress that made my throat tighten, me in a tux 2 sizes optimistic. We danced. We took photos by the fountain. We promised to make the summer count. At sunrise after graduation, we sat in the bleachers and talked about everything except the one subject humming under our ribs: what comes next. When the speaker crackled alive for the last time, I thought I had the answer. I was wrong. The first real choice was waiting right around the corner. Chicago came as a dare I accepted. I packed a borrowed suitcase, kissed my mother's cheek, and drove north until the flat Texas horizon gave way to skylines and wind that cut through every layer. The city taught me humility fast. Snow tires, rent due on the first, professors who didn't care about my resume. I loved it anyway. I found a coffee shop that smelled like burnt toast and hope, and I learned the L by getting lost. Graduate school stretched me. I met people who argued ideas for fun, people who ran toward hard problems instead of away. At night, I'd text Jennifer photos of frozen Lake Michigan like it was the moon. She'd send back pictures in scrubs with a caption, "Still here." We weren't together, not officially. We were two trains on different tracks, waving from the windows when we crossed. It felt brave to leave. It felt necessary. It also felt, in moments, like betrayal. Back home, Jennifer was learning a different kind of toughness. Nursing school in Texas doesn't care about your plans. It cares whether you can think on your feet at 3 a.m. with a monitor and a scared family staring at you. She sent me photos of textbooks spiderwebbed with sticky notes, scrubs tossed over a chair, a thermos that said, "You've got this." When we talked, she didn't brag. She told me about a granddad who needed someone to sit and listen, about a teenager who ate after a week of fear, about hands washed so many times they cracked. I loved the way she sounded. Not heroic, just useful. There's a dignity in being needed. I was chasing ideas. She was preventing disasters. On Sunday nights, we'd compare calendars, each pretending the overlap was more than luck. We were drifting, but gently, like boats on the lake tied to different docks. The question grew, how long could that last? We didn't have a dramatic breakup, no slammed doors, no returned sweaters. One Sunday after church and breakfast tacos, we sat under a live oak and told the truth. We were both building lives that didn't match a shared schedule. We agreed to take the pressure off, not because love wasn't there, but because timing was louder. We promised to be each other's person, the one who answers on the second ring. Older couples we knew had stories like that. A detour here, a gap there, a return that made sense. It sounded reasonable. It was reasonable. I walked her to her car, and we hugged like grown-ups who wouldn't let panic write the script. She said, "We'll be okay." I said, "Call if you need anything." We weren't pretending it was easy. We were choosing a slower road, the kind with fewer gas stations and views. As she pulled away, I told myself that patience and faith would be enough. I dated in Chicago because that's what you do when you're 20-something and every weekend has a rooftop. Coffee dates, museum afternoons, polite first kisses that never found a second gear. Good people, wrong timing. Jennifer dated too. She told me once that a man ended things because he felt like he was standing in my shadow. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't gloat. I didn't hurt less. We kept talking a few times a year, like radio operators tapping out coordinates. Still here, still okay. When my program ended, a manager floated an overseas assignment that could fast-track my career. I called Jennifer and expected her to talk me out of it. She didn't. She said, "Go see what you can do." Sometimes love makes a bigger circle so it doesn't snap. I booked the ticket. On the jetway, I looked at my phone and typed 2 words I believed with my chest. "See you." People will tell you that certainty is a young person's game, but we carried a quiet kind the way some folks carry a lucky coin. Even while miles piled up between us, the idea of us didn't fade. It sharpened. I pictured a porch swing, a dog that came when called, her badge on a hook by the door. Not because I'd earned it, but because someday had lived in our town longer than either of us. Maybe that's foolish. Maybe it's how you keep walking when roads split. I sent postcards from places with neon and noise. She texted back recipes and photos of storm clouds over the pasture. We were building separate lives with an open space in the middle shaped like a promise. If you've ever believed you'd circle back to what matters, you know the comfort and the danger in that. I didn't hear the clock yet. I heard the echo. We'll find our way home. Chicago taught me how to carry winter and uncertainty at the same time. I dated, politely and earnestly, coffee that turned into walks, museum tickets bought with student discounts, dinners where both of us pretended the city noise didn't make us shout. The women I met were smart and busy. Many had a 5-year plan and a backup plan. I admired that. I also learned a truth older folks know. Timing is a third person at every table. I could feel myself building a life that didn't leave much room. Friends joked I was married to my program. Maybe I was. On Sundays, I'd call home and hear my mother ask if I was eating enough greens. I'd tell her I was fine and change the subject. The city made me quick, but it also made me vague. I wanted more, I just didn't know what shape it took yet. That's when someone opened a door I didn't know existed. I heard about Jennifer through the grapevine you can't escape. Mutual friends, Facebook photos, the occasional text that starts with, "You won't believe." She was dating too. One guy in particular lasted a while, long enough for people to stop whispering and start asking real questions. I never hated him. Truth is, I wanted him to be good to her. Still, when she told me he felt like he was competing with a ghost version of me, I went quiet. If you're over 30, you learn that memories can crowd a room faster than strangers. I didn't gloat. I didn't jump on a plane. I let it sit. And in that silence, I noticed something. We were both trying to be brave in different zip codes. It didn't make us enemies. It made us honest. Our calls stayed steady, like a porch light you leave on for family. I told myself that meant we were healthy. It also meant we were drifting. Paul entered my life like a second winter coat, practical, heavier than it looked, and somehow exactly my size. He was a VP who still remembered where the copy paper was, the kind of mentor who didn't flatter, just shaved nonsense off your day. "Do the work right," he'd say, "then make it look easy." We grabbed coffee at 7 because he said important decisions hate small talk. He asked about my schedule, my goals, my rent, my mother. When I stumbled, he didn't fix it for me. He handed me a better map. Older adults know this kind of guidance, not a rescue, a recalibration. One evening, after we closed a small account that could have gone sideways, he leaned back and told a story about screwing up early in his career and how it cost him a year. "The trick," he said, "is to buy back time any way you can." The next day, he showed me what he meant. "Ever think about going abroad?" Paul asked, sliding a thin folder across the table. Inside was an assignment that sounded like a rumor: messy markets, long flights, work that didn't fit neatly into bullet points. The pay wasn't headline-grabbing, but the package covered everything else. "You'll be stretched," he said, "and you'll come back sharper." I took the folder home and stared at it while takeout cooled. I called my parents. Dad said opportunity rarely knocks twice. Mom asked if I owned a real coat. I texted Jennifer and expected a tug back toward Texas. Instead, she wrote, "Go see what you can do." If you've ever stood at a green light too long, you know the feeling. I was waiting for permission I didn't need. The next morning, I told Paul yes. He didn't clap. He nodded once like a coach who'd seen this play run before. "Good," he said. "Pack light. Bring humility. We leave you on Monday." Tokyo didn't feel like a city. It felt like a system operating at a speed my brain couldn't clock. Neon, schedules, courtesy that doubles as armor, quiet trains that made me hear my own thoughts too loud. Day 1, I bowed at the wrong time and apologized twice for apologizing. The office handed me a badge and a puzzle. I took long walks at night, counting convenience stores and wondering why loneliness is louder when you're surrounded. Older friends had warned me, the first months anywhere new can make you question your shape. They were right. I missed Whataburger. I missed my mother's overwatered plants. I missed the way Houston humidity hugs you like a relative. But the work demanded attention, and attention is a good antidote to panic. I learned routes, rhythms, names. I learned that being a foreigner is a mirror you can't put down. And one night, the city stopped feeling like a test and started feeling like a tool. With the culture shock cooling, routine took over. Morning trains, a quick nod to the clerk who knew my coffee order, evenings solving problems that didn't exist in textbooks. I rented a tiny apartment where the washing machine sang like a children's toy, and I wrote lists on sticky notes because my thoughts kept sprinting ahead of me. The loneliness didn't leave. It changed shape. It became a kind of quiet permission. I tried new food, new routes, new habits, the way people our age try new knees, carefully, with a hand on the rail. Nights were the hardest, as nights tend to be. That's when work ended and echoes started. I filled time with language apps, pickup basketball, too many podcasts. The city rewarded effort, and effort rewarded sleep. Little by little, I felt less like someone visiting and more like someone returning from a long errand. I didn't know it yet, but this was the calm before the pivot. Here's the part I'm not proud of, but I won't dance around it. The freedom that steadied me also tempted me. Casual company was easy to find. Friendly people, clear boundaries, schedules that didn't require promises I couldn't keep. Nothing graphic, nothing cruel, just arrangements built to expire. If you've ever lived out of a suitcase, you know how a short lease can start to feel like a lifestyle. I told myself I was being honest. I told myself I was keeping harm low. The truth is, repetition can dress up as stability. It dulled the ache, and it kept me moving. I kept my rules simple, no lies, no illusions, and I followed them like a budget. Meanwhile, my work improved, my reputation grew, and my phone stayed busy enough to hush the questions. It worked until it didn't. One night, walking home past a vending machine glow, I realized habits were steering me. I needed to decide who was driving. Paul visited twice a year, nominally to check on projects, truthfully to check on me. He had that older brother energy, would lend you a tie and then roast you for the knot. We ate noodles at counters where you have to slurp to be taken seriously. We swapped war stories about clients and deadlines. He never lectured about my personal life, but he asked the kind of questions you feel the next day. How much of this is you, he said once, and how much is the calendar? He meant, are you choosing or are you drifting? I didn't answer right away. He paid the check and changed the subject, which somehow made the question louder. On his last night that trip, we stood on a footbridge watching taxis slide under us like fish. You're doing good work, he said. Save your money. Buy yourself options. It landed like a challenge. I went home and opened a new savings account. I treated saving like a second job. Automatic transfers, no impulse buys, a monthly spreadsheet that would make my father proud. The company paid for housing and flights. I let the salary stack. I quit the little comforts that nibble your paycheck. Subscriptions I forgot to cancel. Gadgets that solve problems I don't have. Older adults know the drill. Money is permission. Each month I watched the number climb, and with it, a picture formed. Porch light, spare room, a yard that needs mowing on Saturdays. Texas kept calling in a voice I could hear through jet lag. I sent my parents more than I used to, not because they asked, but because it felt right to start paying back the tab of childhood. When a colleague mentioned a decent listing back near Houston, I ran the math and didn't flinch. I put in an offer from 12 time zones away. When the acceptance came through, I exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for years. The house wasn't fancy, but it was mine, ours, if life tilted that way again. 3 bedrooms, a stubborn gate, a kitchen that wanted to be cooked in. I flew back to sign papers, shook hands with a realtor who called me sir, and stood alone in a living room that smelled like drywall and promise. I could see holidays there and fights and makeups and quiet Tuesdays where nothing special happens except you're home. I sent Jennifer a photo of the empty porch with a caption that said, "Someday." She replied with a heart and nothing else. If you've ever built something for a future you can't guarantee, you know that bittersweet blend. Hope on one side, fear on the other. I stocked the pantry, left a spare key with my dad, and boarded a flight back to work feeling strangely steady. I had a place to land. I had a plan. And that's exactly when plans like to test you. When I flew back to Texas, the air felt like a familiar handshake. Thick, warm, a little bossy. I carried my suitcase into the house I'd bought on faith and stood in the kitchen listening to its new emptiness. The next morning I went to the grocery store for coffee, paper towels, and a reason to feel normal. I found Jennifer in the produce aisle debating blueberries like they had a secret. We did that awkward dance people do when years fall away all at once. Smile, step, laugh, hug. No theatrics, just the gravity of home. We talked about nothing for 10 minutes. Heat advisories, clinic hours, traffic on 59. Then she asked if I'd tried the diner on Main since it changed owners. I said no. She said, "You should." I heard the invitation inside the recommendation. We walked to checkout together. 2 carts, 1 conversation. At the door she said, "It's good to see you." I said, "It's good to be seen." Over coffee at that diner, Jennifer told me she and the guy from before had ended things months earlier. No scandal, just the slow math of 2 people wanting different lives. She said he was kind, and that kindness deserved honesty. I respected that. We traded headlines from our time apart, her long shifts, my overseas routine, little family updates that anchor you to place. If you're over 30, you know those conversations, not performances, check-ins that make the world smaller. She looked the same and different, same eyes, steadier voice. "I'm done comparing my life to pictures," she said, meaning engagement posts and filtered vacations. I nodded because the scroll can steal your sense of timing. We split the check like grown-ups who understood budgets and habit. At the door, she hesitated. "I've missed this," she said. I asked, "This as in coffee or this as in us?" She smiled in that sideways way she has. "Let's find out." We didn't leap. We returned. The first few weeks felt like easing a porch swing back into its chain, testing the creek, trusting the posts. We walked the neighborhood after dinner, passing sprinkler arcs and barking dogs, talking about things couples our age really talk about. Sleep, schedules, parents, old cars that keep starting. Jennifer told stories from her shifts that sounded like small heroics without capes. I told stories about deadlines no one claps for. The rhythm came back because the rhythm had never really left. Even laughter felt familiar, like finding your old team hoodie in the back of a drawer. One night we sat on my tailgate with takeout, and she reached for my hand like she'd always had the right. We didn't label anything that night. We didn't need to. The next morning she texted a photo of my front porch in good light with 2 words. "Looks right." I stared at it longer than I admit. Families notice everything. My mom invited Jennifer to Sunday dinner with all the subtlety of a marching band. Her parents arrived with a casserole that could feed an army, plus the kind of hugs that say, "What took so long?" We ate too much, told old stories, and pretended nobody was picturing a rehearsal dinner. It was sweet, and it was heavy, the way tradition can be both. After dishes, her dad and I stood in the yard discussing the stubborn gate. He said, "You've got a good place here." I said, "I want to make it better." The women laughed inside, the TV murmured, the dog next door complained about absolutely nothing. Jennifer slipped out with 2 iced teas and a look that said we were both being watched and wished well. On the drive to her apartment, she said, "I don't want to rush and I don't want to waste time." I said, "Same." We both meant it. Real life took the wheel. Work emails, grocery runs, fixing that gate that hated me on principle. Jennifer kept a spare set of scrubs on a hook at my place. I kept a mug at hers. We learned each other's Tuesday moods and Saturday habits. There's a holiness to ordinary days older couples talk about, and I started to understand it. We cooked together, which really meant I chopped and she rescued. We argued once about nothing and apologized like adults who didn't want to practice repeating it. One evening, a thunderstorm pinned us inside, and we sat on the floor with a folder of old photos our parents had saved. Us in Little League, us at choir, us in a paper crown at some birthday. "We were kids," she said, half wonder, half warning. A week later, we drove past a little jewelry store in a strip mall, and she glanced just long enough to plant a question. It grew. I'm old-fashioned where it counts. I called her dad and asked if I could stop by. We talked on his porch about bills, repairs, and how love isn't a feeling you chase but a decision you keep making. He clapped my shoulder the way fathers do when the answer is yes, without saying yes. I bought a ring that wasn't flashy but felt honest, simple, sturdy, with room for a future. At sunset, I took Jennifer to the park where we'd once shared a milkshake and a bad playlist. I said my piece, who she was to me then, who she is to me now, who I promised to be. My hands didn't shake until I opened the box. She cried the way joy surprises you, and we laughed because neither of us remembered the speech we'd planned. She said yes. We hugged long enough for the mosquitoes to file a complaint. On the drive home, we didn't turn on the radio. Engagement adds tasks and reveals truths. We compared calendars like air traffic controllers, negotiated a budget that didn't break the future, and learned the delicate art of choosing a venue without starting a war. She moved in with a weekend of labeled boxes and a promise to purge duplicates. Our routines braided, my early workouts, her late shifts, a shared grocery list with mysterious produce I had to Google. We talked about everything because that's what grown-ups promise, and most days we delivered. Now and then, a question would sneak in sideways. "Are you happy with me? Do you ever miss all that freedom?" I answered the first quickly and the second carefully. I didn't brag about my past, and I didn't hide it. I tried to be decent. She nodded, but the air changed half a degree. If you've been engaged, you know. Tiny drafts can turn into doors. I told myself it was stress. Stress rarely travels alone. Wedding planning is a machine that runs on decisions. Florist or no, band or playlist, buffet or plated. We spent Saturdays touring spaces and Sundays emailing vendors while our parents quietly campaigned for their favorites. Jennifer's cousin Tammy joined a few meetings with spreadsheets and pep talks. It looked like progress. It felt like pressure. One night, sitting on the couch with timelines spread like maps, Jennifer asked about my past. How many serious relationships? What did you learn? Do you ever compare? Fair questions, asked gently. I answered honestly but lightly, trimming details the way you trim a hedge. Neat, respectful. She listened, then looked past me at nothing in particular, like she'd found a thread and wasn't sure whether to pull. We closed the laptops and watched a rerun we'd both seen. She leaned her head on my shoulder, warm and quiet. The credits rolled. The question didn't. I slept, but not deeply. Something had shifted. In the weeks after, small moments felt amplified. If I reached for her in the kitchen, she'd smile and then study my face like an X-ray. If I complimented her, she'd thank me and then ask if I meant it, not with suspicion, with worry. We tried being playful about it. Date nights, long walks, a weekend trip where we argued about directions and made up before dinner. She brought up counseling as a tune-up. I said I'd go. But underneath the compromise, a drum kept beating. Would I be satisfied long-term? Experience is a loaded word when love is on the line. I told her the truth I believed. Commitment isn't graded on a curve, and thought that would settle it. It didn't. One evening she set down her fork and said, almost academically, "What would make us safer?" I said, "Us, together, facing the same way." She nodded slowly. I didn't know it yet, but we'd reached the bend. The red flags didn't come waving. They came whispering. Questions framed as hypotheticals. Jokes that weren't jokes. I caught myself rehearsing answers in the shower, practicing calm, trying to be the man I promised. Steady, not defensive. One night, after a long shift for her and a long day for me, we sat on the porch listening to a neighbor's wind chimes argue with the humidity. Jennifer said she didn't want to lose me to disappointment later, that fear has a way of rewriting history. I told her fear doesn't get the pen unless we hand it over. I meant it. She looked at the ring, then at me, and asked if I trusted her to fix what she couldn't yet name. Yes, I said, and I did. Still, as we turned off the porch light and locked the door, I felt a hinge in the night. The next conversation would not be hypothetical. I should have seen it coming. That night started like any other. Leftovers warming in the oven, a stack of mail on the counter, two people trying to meet in the middle. Jennifer dried her hands on a dish towel and asked if we could sit. Her voice was steady. Careful nurses speak before hard news. She said she loved me, that she wanted our marriage to last, and then the sentence that bent the room. "I'm afraid you'll get bored," she said. "What if we open things for a little while, just to make sure?" For a second I thought she was teasing, the way couples do when they're testing a boundary. She wasn't. She had clearly rehearsed it, the pauses. She talked about insecurity, about experience, about not wanting to fail 10 years from now because we were proud to be practical today. I felt the floor tilt, the air thinned. She waited, hands folded, asking for a loan. I stared at the ring. She laid out rules like a contract. Strangers only, never someone we know, never more than once, no overnights, no feelings, honesty, and it ends before the wedding. She called it a safety net, a way to quiet the voice in her head that listed my past like evidence. I listened because that's what adults do when the person they love is afraid. I asked where the idea came from. She said podcasts, friends, internet, 1,000 voices saying modern problems need modern solutions. I thought about our parents, about the couples at church who made it through layoffs and chemo and deployment by holding on tighter, not letting go. I told her my history wasn't a hunger, it was a season. She nodded, but doubt doesn't obey logic. Then she did something that startled me. She gave me the same permission. "You too," she said. "Same rules." She thought she was leveling the field. To me, it leveled the house. I searched for another explanation. Stress talking, pre-wedding jitters, a test I could pass by being calm. "You're serious," I said. She nodded. I felt my face heat the way it does when you drop a glass. I tried humor, it fell flat. I tried reason, it bounced. I asked if she'd talked to anyone who knew us. She said Tammy knew she was wrestling with it. That didn't help. I was tired and hurt and not at my best. I said something I regret because I wanted the logic to hit home. "Okay," I said. "By your rules, I could pick someone too. What if I chose someone we both know?" She recoiled, called it gross, said that wasn't the point. Exactly. The point was that rules couldn't protect what vows are meant to hold. I wish I had been gentler making it. Instead, the room went colder. She folded into herself. I felt the bridge between us give. I took a breath and did the adult thing left. I put words where feelings had been rattling. I told her I wasn't bargaining over the foundation. I said I wasn't interested in passes, not because I'm a saint, but because marriage is an all-in promise you keep on the boring days. I said my past was not a template, and it wasn't a threat. I said I understood fear, but fear doesn't get to drive our vows. She listened, cheeks damp, jaw set the way it gets when she's bracing for a hard shift. I reached for her hand and she let me hold it. "I love you," I said, "and I'm not opening this relationship." Her eyes closed like a door on a windy day. "If I do it anyway?" she asked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't break anything. I made it enough for us to remember. Then the wedding is off, and we are done. We didn't fix it that night. Some arguments untie you slowly. She said she needed time to think. I said I needed time to breathe. I took my pillow to the guest room because I didn't trust words not to sharpen at 2 a.m. In the morning, we moved around each other like drivers at a four-way stop, polite, hesitant, signaling too much. She started a run of night shifts, the kind that drain color from your week. She left dinners in the fridge with sticky notes that said, "Love you," in looping script. I answered texts with thumbs up I didn't feel. I kept working, lifting, fixing the gate, anything with a clear problem and a wrench. When friends asked how the planning was going, I said, "On track," because I didn't know how to explain we had stumbled at the edge of a promise. The house got quiet. On Thursday, silence gave way to something else, and the story changed. Jennifer didn't turn cold after that talk. She went the other way. Dinners kept appearing in the fridge, warm notes on the lids, quick kisses before her commute. In the morning, I'd find coffee by the sink with a smiley face drawn in whipped cream. Familiar routines have a way of convincing you the storm passed while you slept. I wanted to believe that. I leaned into chores I could finish, mowing lines straight, touching up paint on trim, finally setting the gate so it closed with a click. We didn't revisit the subject. We also didn't laugh as easily. When a relationship is bruised, kindness can feel like makeup. You appreciate the effort, but you still see the mark. I told myself she was trying, and so was I. On Wednesday, I texted, "Let's reset Friday. Burgers, porch, no wedding talk." She replied with a heart. Then, "Night shift this week." That should have landed softer than it did. Night shifts are normal, really, in her line of work, but pattern changed. She started leaving earlier, coming home later, and going quiet about the middle. Nurses usually trade stories. Now her stories had no edges. When I asked how the shift went, she said busy and changed the subject to groceries or the neighbor's dog. I told myself to be fair. I counted how many times she'd shown up for me, how many casseroles she'd delivered to my fridge. Then I noticed small things older folks always notice. A new perfume that didn't match her usual, a charger that stayed in her bag, the way her phone faced down on the table like a lid. Suspicion is a bad hobby. It eats hours and leaves you hungrier. I fought it by making plans, date night, Sunday lunch with her parents, a day trip we could take. She agreed to all of it. Then she said, "Next week, I'm nights again." Thursday evening, I sat at the desk paying bills and clearing inbox clutter when a notification slid across the screen. It wasn't mine. It was Jennifer's calendar account logged in from earlier. Subject line, "Marriott Downtown. Reservation confirmed, 7:30 p.m. That hotel is a block from my office. It's also where teams from work grab drinks after deadlines. I stared long enough for the words to blur. I told myself it could be a surprise for us, a peace offering, a bridge back to easy. My chest answered before my head did. I texted her, "How's your shift?" She replied, "Busy. Might be late." I set the phone down like it was hot. Older adults talk about gut instinct the way farmers talk about clouds. You learn to read the air. I pulled up the map, checked the time, checked it again. Traffic looked light, like the city was inviting me. The clock said move. My feet agreed. I drove downtown with the stereo off, the way you do when you need air and answers. The Marriott lobby was cool and busy, all marble and light. I took a seat where I could see the elevators and the desk, head down over water I didn't drink. Paul called to check in. I told him enough to make him quiet. He said, "I'm nearby. Do you want company?" Pride said no. Common sense said yes. He walked in 15 minutes later, nodded once, and sat like we'd planned it. Time got slippery. Every ding from the elevator made my ribs jump. At 6:30, Jennifer stepped through the revolving door in street clothes, hair done, not a trace of a 12-hour shift. For a second, I thought I had the date wrong. Then she smiled at the concierge and took the key card. My hands went cold. Paul touched my shoulder. "You want the truth," he said. "This is it." Paul didn't gawk or editorialize. He watched me, not her, which is what real friends do when the ground gives way. "You don't have to guess anymore," he said. "You can know." I hated how simple that sounded. Guessing lets you keep hope on life support. Knowing pulls the plug. He reminded me that clarity is still a kindness, even when it stings. He also reminded me about practical things older folks mention first. Accounts, the house, the timeline, I nodded, then shook my head, then nodded again. "What do you want to do?" he asked. I said, "I want the truth." He said, "Then we act." We waited 10 long minutes that felt like a loop, watching the elevator numbers blink up, then down. At last I stood, palms damp. We walked to the desk together. My voice surprised me by holding steady. I asked the clerk to connect me to Jennifer's room. The phone began to ring slowly. Paul and I took a booth in the lounge where you can see the elevators reflected in a brass column. He ordered club soda without asking. My hands didn't need help shaking. The lobby piano played a song I knew from dentist offices. I watched numbers climb, drop, climb. Waiting turns minutes into wet cement. You set one foot wrong and it keeps the print forever. Paul kept his eyes on me, not the door. "Breathe," he said. I did, but only halfway. At 6:29, the door sighed and let in a gust of perfume and heat. Jennifer walked across the marble in street clothes, hair done, a purse I bought last Christmas tucked under her arm. No badge, no tired shoulders, no 12-hour shift in her posture. She smiled at the desk. The clerk handed her a key card and gestured to the elevators. She didn't hesitate. I heard the ding when the doors closed. I felt mine close too. I didn't want a scene. I wanted the truth. Paul touched his watch like a referee and nodded toward the phones by the concierge. We stood together, two men who had rehearsed nothing and suddenly had lines. The handset felt heavier than it should. I asked the clerk to connect me to Jennifer's room. My name came out steady, which surprised me. While it rang, I saw our parents around one table, Sunday dinners, the dog-eared photos we'd just sorted. I saw the ring box in my sock drawer at home and the gate that finally latched. The line clicked once, twice. A breath. Then her voice, light and unsuspecting, said, "Hello?" It sounded like every casual call we'd ever had, the kind that begins with grocery lists and ends with good night. I couldn't fit all the questions in my mouth. I couldn't fit any. The point of the call was simple. The point of the call was consequence. Now. I didn't shout. I thought I would, but a different voice arrived. Low, steady, the one I use when machines fail and everyone needs instructions. "Jennifer," I said, "listen carefully. If you do this, our engagement is over. I won't marry into doubt." Silence held for a beat, then two. She said my name like a question and took a quick breath, the kind you take when you've been caught looking at the answer key. I kept going because stopping would have broken me. You asked for rules to make fear quiet. My rule is simple: no. Not now, not later. If you've checked in, we're done. The wedding is off. Paul was beside me, still as a statue, one hand in his pocket, the other on the counter like a brace. On the line, a small sound, maybe the start of a sentence, maybe a sob, tried to grow. I didn't let it. I hung up before kindness could undo clarity again. After I set the receiver down, the lobby noise rushed back. Piano, ice in glasses, the murmur of people whose lives hadn't cracked open. Paul didn't say, "I'm sorry." He said, "Let's move." We walked past the elevators like they were a cliff and out through the same doors she'd used minutes earlier. The Houston air hit hot and wet. I could breathe and hated what the air tasted like. On the sidewalk, my phone lit with her name, then another name, then my mother. I let it buzz until the screen went dark. Paul steered me toward the garage. "Come to my place tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we handle logistics, accounts, the house. You're not making decisions alone." Older men know which words to use when the bottom falls out. I sat in his passenger seat and realized I was shaking from my ribs out. "Am I doing the right thing?" I asked. He said, "You're doing the necessary." Tonight. At Paul's place, he poured water and set a blanket on couch like we'd done this before. We hadn't. He handed me a legal pad and said, "Write what needs doing. We'll tackle it in daylight." My phone kept lighting, calls, texts, emails. I powered it down and felt room exhale. I called my dad from Paul's landline and told him I was okay, that I needed a few days to clear my head. I kept it PG because some grief shouldn't ride the wires. Around midnight, I stood, thanked Paul, and said I had to move or the walls would grow teeth. He offered the guest room. I shook my head. He didn't argue. He walked me to car, pressed my shoulder, and said, "Head east. Drive until the thoughts thin out." I merged onto 59 with the windows cracked, the city folding behind me like a map. By the time the skyline shrank, I was gone into the dark. By sunrise, I was back at the house, moving like a firefighter through smoke. I didn't linger on rooms. I grabbed the essentials: clothes, passport, documents, the ring box I couldn't decide to keep or toss. I left the framed photos where they were. Some absences should be obvious. I fed the neighbor's cat a scoop out of habit and locked the door one careful click at a time. Paul's legal pad rode shotgun with a pen clipped like a plan I couldn't read yet. I pointed the truck southeast because water felt like the only thing big enough to quiet me. Older folks say drive until your thoughts change shape. I took them literally. I stopped for gas, for coffee, for stretches where the sky widened and the ache did not. Somewhere past Naples, the air got saltier and the radio gave up to static. I kept going until the road thinned to bridges and the ocean breathed beneath me. I found a cheap motel in the lower Keys, the kind with a humming ice machine and towels that remember summers. I paid cash for the first few nights and learned the bartender's name before the clerk learned mine. Rum is a poor counselor, but it shows up on time. I wasn't trying to celebrate. I was trying not to think. Days blurred into long walks on cracked sidewalks, sun that punished and forgave, and a notebook I didn't open. I kept my phone on airplane mode except at noon, when I texted my dad 3 words. "I'm okay. Promise." He sent back thumbs-up emojis because he knows when to ask and when to let a man work. Older adults will recognize the pattern: busy hands, quiet heart, loud nights. I told myself I was catching my breath. The truth was tougher. Each evening ended the same: cup, ceiling fan, a TV I didn't hear. I wasn't healing. I was hiding. I made a rule: no calls I wouldn't take sober, no messages I'd have to explain twice. That shrank my world to one voice: my dad's. At lunch, I'd call him from a payphone outside a bait shop because it felt calmer than my cell. He asked about sleep, not about her. He told me which neighbor replaced their roof and that the pecan tree looked tired this year. The ordinary kept me stitched together. On the 4th night, I opened my laptop and stared at a blank email to Jennifer. I typed paragraphs that sounded brave and bitter, deleted them, tried again, deleted again. Older folks taught me that short is kind when there's no fix. I wrote 3 words in the subject and the body: It's over. Michael. I read it 10 times, then 20. My thumb hovered like it carried more than skin and bone. I hit send and watched the screen confirm delivery. The room went quiet. The days stacked like coasters. I learned the names of street cats and which pier gave the best breeze after 4. I bought groceries at a place that sold fishing lures next to cereal and paid in cash so my wallet felt honest. On Sundays I sat on a bench outside a church I didn't enter and listened to the choir leak through the doors. An older couple fished in matching hats and argued kindly about bait. Watching them was better than TV. My inbox kept filling. I answered the bare minimum: approvals, receipts, anything that didn't require a soul. Paul texted twice, "You good?" and "Take the time you need." I didn't respond because if I started, I'd have to continue. The motel staff learned my routine. They stopped asking housekeeping questions and left ice. At night, I stood at the sink and watched bourbon crawl. Somewhere in there, the fear of losing my job let go of me first. A month shaved off the calendar without changing my watch. I marked time by laundry cycles and the crab traps along the seawall. The keys do their best to heal you: bright water, loud gulls, sunsets that hustle strangers into applause. But grief is stubborn. It keeps its own hours. I tried small repairs: jogs at dawn, real food, fewer drinks. I made it 2 days, then 3, then didn't. I wrote letters I never mailed and prayers I wasn't sure where to send. Dad called one afternoon and told me the mower finally started on the first pull. We treated that like news. He didn't press. He said, "Son, the only way out is through," and then asked if I'd check the oil in the truck. Ordinary talk saved me from the deep end again. That night, I sat on the seawall and waited to feel different. The tide rose, touched my boots, and went about its business. I stayed empty. March was supposed to be a reset. Then the headlines turned into closures, and closures turned into flights vanishing from the board. Paul called from New York and said HQ needed bodies, not bravado. 30 days, he promised. Stabilize the accounts, then go home. Florida felt like hiding. New York felt like purpose. So I packed the truck, masked up, and drove north through half-empty interstates and nervous diner coffee. Manhattan was quieter than I'd ever seen it, like a cathedral after the service. We split the team on shifts, wiped down doorknobs like surgeons, and ran contingency plans that mutated every morning. I slept on a futon in a borrowed studio and learned how sirens can braid themselves into your thoughts. At night I'd FaceTime Dad and pretend I believed the news. 30 days, I kept saying, like a charm you rub when the lights flicker. 30 days can be merciful. 30 days can also be a lie. Tonight, 30 days stretched like taffy. Spring bled into summer, masks replaced handshakes, and we learned which grocery aisle carried toilet paper at dawn. Work never went remote for us. Our clients were the kind that panic if no one answers. I carried a thermometer like a passport and measured rooms by how far I could stand from a stranger. Sunday meant church on a laptop and dinner from a container. The studio walls shrank until even the plants leaned forward to listen. I stopped watching press conferences. I started calling my father twice a day. He told me about rain in Texas, about the neighbor's new fence, about the gate that still behaved. He never said her name and I never asked. Out the window, a city that never sleeps learned how. I kept my bag packed anyway, a superstition in zipper form. Every time the news hinted at relief, the numbers argued back. Hope flexed. Reality closed the tab. The call came on a gray Tuesday between spreadsheets. Dad's voice was calm, the way people sound when they're quoting doctors. Chest pain, ambulance, tests. "They say I need a bypass," he said as if he were announcing a tire change. The line crackled. The world narrowed to a hospital hallway smell I knew from childhood. New rules meant no visitors, staggered updates, masked faces hiding worry. I paced the studio and counted breaths, his and mine. Paul knocked on my door with takeout and a plan. "Go home," he said. "We'll manage here." Flights were erratic, routes changing by the hour, but I hunted anyway. I called the surgeon's office, got the nurse's name, wrote it on a sticky note like armor. Older adults understand this part. Logistics become love when you can't be bedside. That night I talked to Dad about irrigation timers and insurance cards because normal is a medicine. We hung up. I booked the earliest seat. The airport felt like a movie set after closing. Lights on, bodies sparse, announcements echoing for no one. I double-masked, sanitized, and held my boarding pass like a hall pass. The plane lifted through clouds and I watched the city shrink, then disappear, as if distance could coach me into courage. On the connection in Atlanta, I called Mom. She sounded brave and tired. "He's in good hands," she said. "Come straight here." I promised I would, then added the practicals: groceries, bills, the house key, and Dad's toolbox. Landing in Houston, I drove past our exit without meaning to, muscle memory pulling toward the office, toward the life that had paused itself. I turned around. At home, I set my bag down and made a list. Hospital calls, paperwork, clean clothes, questions for the surgeon. At the bottom, I wrote one more line I didn't want to face. Talk to Jennifer. I circled it once, then twice before bed. The next morning began with phone trees and hold music. I spoke to a coordinator who translated surgeon speak into steps, pre-op labs, consent forms, what to bring, what to leave. Mom texted photos of Dad making a bad joke with a thumbs up. I sent one back of coffee and a Bible verse on an index card. After lunch, Paul called. He skipped the small talk. "You'll need closure," he said. "Not for her, for you. Decide your script before the room writes one for you." He was right. I opened Facebook, unblocked Jennifer, and scrolled through months I'd missed. Birthdays, casseroles, a photo of her in scrubs with tired eyes above the mask. My thumb hovered over the message button. I didn't want to fight. I wanted to finish. I typed, "I'm back in town for my dad's surgery. We should talk. Public place." I chose a steakhouse with distance between tables and memories. I hit send. The dot appeared, then another. Steakhouses smell like decisions. I got there early and asked for a booth near the wall, the kind of seat where people talk about mortgages and mercy. Jennifer walked in wearing the perfume I know and a mask of courage. We did the awkward hello that isn't a hug and isn't not one. The waiter poured water and left us alone. For a while we talked weather, Dad's surgery, the price of eggs, safe islands for two people who used to share a shore. When the silence made room, she folded her napkin into a square and said, "I'm sorry." No speech, no excuses, just that. My chest went tight like a belt. I asked, "Sorry you got caught, or sorry you hurt me?" She blinked and said, "Both, and more than that." I believed the tears. I also believed the timeline. I told her I'd come for closure, not a retrial. She nodded, braced herself, and said, "Ask me anything." She started. "Nothing happened," she said. "I thought I could disconnect, but when you called, I panicked and came downstairs. I believed parts and distrusted the rest, the way you do with stories told through fog. I said I wasn't here to check security footage. I was here to name what happened to us." We talked about fear like it was a third person at the table. Hers about my past, mine about building a future on a hairline crack. I told her a memory. When we were 9 and a dog charged us, I stepped in front without thinking. "I've been doing that ever since," I said. "Only this time, when I stood between us and what could hurt us, you were the one holding the knife." She flinched because the image was sharp, and I hated that I'd used it. The waiter refilled water. She reached into her purse, pulled the ring box, and pushed it toward me. I kept the box on the table, untouched. She said she thought a shortcut would make us stronger, that she hated the person who made that choice. "Can you forgive me?" she asked. "And can we try again?" The room felt smaller, like the booth had scooted inward. I told her the truth had hardened on the drive over. I could forgive her and still say no. Forgiveness is about what I carry. Reconciliation is about what we build, and our foundation was cracked. She nodded, cried, and didn't argue. We talked logistics the way adults in love do: families, holidays, the house key she still had, how to be kind in a town that remembers everything. I told her I wished her a life that fit, that fear wouldn't write. She reached for my hand. I let her hold it and then let go. We stood, paid, and walked to different doors. I left lighter, not happy, but free. Here's what the steakhouse night settled for me. Love isn't a rescue mission, and trust doesn't heal on deadlines. I used to think time and effort could glue anything back together if you just held the pieces long enough. Older folks tried to tell me different. A cracked foundation needs rebuilding, not hope. Self-respect isn't pride, it's guardrails. It keeps you from trading your peace for a promise you have to supervise. I learned that forgiveness is about what I carry out of the fire, not who I drag back in. I can wish Jennifer well and still choose a front door that locks behind me. The ordinary saves me now, making coffee, calling Dad, fixing the squeaky hinge, because ordinary was the point all along. If you've lived long enough, you know the bravest word is often no. Not angry, not loud, just clear. I left the ring in its box and took my future in my hands. That is enough. Today. Here's where my story lands. I loved a woman I grew up with, planned a wedding, and watched trust split like a bad board underweight. I tried anger. It burned fast and left smoke. I tried running. Distance packed itself in my bags. What worked was simpler. Forgive, release, rebuild. Forgiveness let me carry my own heart out of the fire. Release kept me from dragging us both back into it. Rebuild means coffee with my dad, fixing what squeaks, choosing quiet over drama, and letting the future be earned, not imagined. If the person you love most betrays you before the vows, what would you do? I chose to forgive and let go. That's not defeat. That's stewardship. Your peace deserves a guardian, and that guardian is you. If this story touched something you've lived, add your voice. Comment 1 for closure, 2 for keep trying. I'll read every answer.